Okay, let's move on to sports. This is hugely controversial right now, of course, as we come up
Yes,
to
it
the
is.
Olympics. We now have transgendered athletes wanting to compete in transgendered women wanting to compete in women's
And now we
sports.
have one who will be competing, Laurel
Right, in
Hubbard.
New
Yep.
Zealand. We
Yep.
have in
In weightlifting.
and a hurdler was just rejected for
Okay.
having. They've tried to set, I guess, testosterone levels at a certain cap for a certain amount of time. But let's just go to the base fact about um, physical female differences as it applies to sports. And you had a couple points. You write that women's world records are consistently about 10% lower than those of men. You wrote in 2019, 2,500 men competing worldwide for the 100-meter event beat the fastest women's times.
Yeah.
And you wrote, without segregating sports, it's not just that men would win, women would never even qualify for the competition.
Yeah,
in the
on
first place.
average.
On
Yeah, I mean,
was
and it
stressing-
depends, of course, at what level you're talking
Right.
about. Yeah.
So let's talk about why there are those differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's not I think most people are not surprised to learn that testosterone in puberty, male levels of testosterone are clearly responsible for that increased height, increased bone strength, bone density, longer bones. That's why males tend to be taller. Increased hemoglobin, which gives males much more power, so that they can use to fuel those larger muscles during sports. And so the combination of significantly higher strength and muscle mass, 30 to 40% more than females, or even more in the upper body, is a huge benefit to men in sports. Like, there's just no question that the male going through male puberty gives men an extremely large advantage. You know, it can be 10 to 50% depending on the sport. So, you know, in certain running events, it might be 10%, but in weightlifting, it could be 30%. So on average, if you're, you know, a highly trained athlete, those are going to be consistent advantages. So the question that comes up with trans women in particular, so trans men seem not to be an issue. Trans men can compete against men, but tend not to have any kind of advantages, which is not surprising. They're smaller and don't have the same amount of muscle mass, even if they're taking testosterone. So when we're talking about trans women, we're talking, just to be clear, about people who are natal males. And in the case, say, with Laurel Hubbard, somebody who experienced a male puberty, so was able to accrue these advantages of increased muscle mass and body size and strength. The argument, I think, from her point of view is that, well, as a trans woman, she has to reduce her testosterone. And so people might think, as some are trying to advocate for this position, which is just not supported by evidence, which is, well, if she reduces her testosterone, it happens to be to 10 nanomoles per liter, which is still far above the normal female range. But in any event, even if she were to block it entirely for a year, she would still not lose all of those advantages that she gained from going through a male puberty. So the one thing that does go down to typical female levels is the hemoglobin. But almost everything else is retained. The bone strength is retained. Muscle mass drops, but it doesn't drop anywhere near to the typical female level. It drops about 5 to 10% on average. And actually, a study just came out, which was a review of 13 studies looking at this issue. And they said that muscle mass and strength drops about 5% after a year of sex hormone therapy, that is blocking testosterone in a natal male. So the evidence is clear that there are these physical traits that are retained in trans women that would, on average, give them a physical advantage in sports. My view is that doesn't necessarily decide the issue. It just means that's what the science says. And then we have to figure out what to do. So I don't want to tell anybody what to do. I don't even want to have an opinion about that, because I think that science is best done without a strong social or political agenda. And here, I just don't even want to get involved in that. So I don't have a real strong opinion there. I do have a strong opinion about the science. Trans women on average have an advantage over natal women.